Saturday, November 9th, 1986. Two unemployed men were arrested on charges they'd killed five people during a 3-day spree of robberies and arson fires that terrorized two Rochester neighborhoods. They called it a five people killing spree, but honestly, it was actually six, not five. Welcome back to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Philip Tomaso. Hello. Today is Monday, June 5th, and I am so sorry that we did not have a new episode last Monday. I've had a lot going on personally. I've had a lot going on mentally. I've had a lot going on physically, and I was unable to get any episodes up last Monday. What I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to record 3 in a row and get them ready for the next 3 Mondays. So something like that never happens again. That's all on me. That is all my fault, and I completely apologize. Now, I do have 3 new episodes ready to record. However, they're slightly shorter than the normal half hour to 45-minute episodes I've been sharing. Oh, excuse me, I'm just taking a little sip there. Okay, so today, though, episode 14, we're going to be talking about 2 men who went on a killing spree in Rochester, New York, back in 1986, back when I was 16 years old. Actually, yeah, I was 16. I turned 16 in June of 1986, and this took place in November. I have absolutely no memory of it. However, I did find the case quite disturbing, actually very disturbing, and thought it would make for a perfect episode, even though it's not a very long episode, because unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot out there to dig up to make it to give it as much background as I normally like to give in one of the What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast episodes. So episode 14, yeah, I'm calling it Ahalt and Campbell. That's their names. They were something else, these 2 men. So it was Saturday, November 9th, 1986. Oh yeah, we're jumping right in because I feel like, having missed last week, I did everybody who listens regularly an injustice, a disservice, and I want to make up for that. So that was my preamble, and I apologize. But we're going to jump right in. Saturday, November 9th, 1986, 2 unemployed men were arrested on charges. They killed 5 people during what they called a 3-day spree of robberies, arson, terrorizing Rochester, New York. They called it a 5 people killing spree, but honestly, if you listen to my story, the way I'm deciphering the data that I've received, it's actually 6. 6 people were killed during this spree, not 5. And I apologize if anybody does not agree with me by the end of the podcast, but it's 6, not 5. So what happened is police staked out the home of one of the suspects arrested, and it was Robert Ahalt. He was 41 at the time. And then they caught Carl Butch Campbell at about 11:30 a.m. Okay. The men began their crime spree shortly after 2 a.m. Thursday when they bludgeoned to death 3 people inside of Dick's 43 Lounge. This was a local bar, a bar in Rochester. They took money from the cash register and smashed into the cigarette machines and stole cigarettes, and then they torched the tavern to cover up the crimes they just committed, killing 3 people. Firefighters found the bodies of the bar owner and her sister-in-law, as well as the remains of one of the customers, one of the regulars at Dick's 43 Lounge. Jeanette Deal was a neighborhood woman who frequented the bar and said it was generally a quiet bar, not a rowdy, not one of those rowdy ones. It usually had the television turned on during the day and only 2 or 3 customers most nights. So it was not like this jam-packed place. There were the regulars, and it was calm. That's how Jeanette describes it. Jeanette Deal. Deal said they have a few troublemakers who come in, but they get them out right quick. Those are her words, right quick. Get them out, which is great. Get rid of the troublemakers. Identify them, separate them, get them the hell out of there. But see, the killings didn't stop there. As if killing 3 people at a bar wasn't bad enough, Ahalt and Campbell then went on and killed 2 other women. One of them was pregnant, and they set both of their residents on fire as well. Kind of their motto, kind of their thing. It was a real rampage, very brutal attacks on these people. This is what Police Major William Mayer said after announcing the arrests on Saturday night. Police also said they had received a telephone tip to link Ahalt and Campbell to the slayings. At the arraignment, Robert Ahalt's attorney, Culver K. Barr, requested the psychiatric exam of one of his client, and he explained that based on their conversations in the jail, Barr's observations led him to believe that his client Ahalt was under some extreme conditions, and the judge in the case, State Supreme Court Justice Donald J. Mark, allowed it. Now, seriously, Barr's client just went on a 48-hour killing spree where Ahalt and his buddy Campbell murdered 5, or we'll call it 6, people, and they got caught, and they're in jail. And Barr thinks his client is under some extreme conditions. Now, I'm no doctor, okay? I never went to any medical school. However, there is a difference between having mental health issues and spending 2 days, 2.5 days tracking down people and killing them. Targeting which is what it comes to, targeting people, tracking them down, and killing them. Herbert J. Lewis never requested a psychiatric examination for his client, Carl Butch Campbell, because he indicated he still wanted time, or still needed time, to review evidence in the case before he filed any motions. But Culver wasn't going to sit around and wait. He went ahead and went with the psychiatric right away, the psychiatric evaluation request right away. He knew, in my opinion, he knew his client had some shit going on, and might be the only way out of it is a mental health or a crazy plea. But anyway, Lewis wasn't doing that, not at this point. So the only one that requested any psychiatric evaluation was Culver for Ahalt, and Lewis did not request one for Campbell. So the first assistant district attorney, Charles J. Saragusa, who, by the way, would go on to become a New York State Supreme Justice and then a federal judge for the United States District Court for the Western New York District. Saragusa knew the difference between mental health and violent, dangerous psychopaths, and requested if any bail were set, it should be for $1 million each. Now, this is 1986. $1 million for bail, that's a lot, okay? It's a lot now for me even wrapping my head around it. $1 million bail in 1986 is a huge, huge sum of money, okay? So anyway, that's 40 years ago, 1986 we're talking, 40 years ago. Both Ahalt and Campbell were residents of the city of Rochester. Ahalt lived at 264 Sherman Street and Campbell at 487 Monroe Avenue. The charges were that each was accused of killing 5 people, but you've heard me, 6. That's the reality, it's 6. Their victims, we take a step back now, we'll do some identification. The bar co-owners at Dick's 43 Lounge were Martha Gretaria, who is 75 years old, and her sister-in-law, Concetta Amator, who's also 75 years old. So these were not women who posed a threat to the 2 men who were in their 40s, right? These are 75-year-old bar owners, 75-year-old women who they killed. And then there was Colin Lee Tuttle, who was 56 years old. He was the patron at the bar, at the time that this all went down. These people, so you understand, were beaten with an 18-inch lead pipe. They were beaten to death with a pipe. Then the homes of two of the victims, not these three people, but the two other victims, were set on fire. The bar was set on fire. They robbed the bar. They smashed the cigarette machine and stole cigarettes. They stole money out of the till, make it look more like a robbery, or they just wanted cigarettes and money uh, after killing these people. But they then set the tavern on fire. The men then killed Campbell's ex-girlfriend. Her name was Doreen Grachus. I don't know. I don't think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Grachus. Grachus. She was 28 years old. She was also 6 months pregnant. Some articles I saw said she was 7 months pregnant. Doreen was sexually mutilated, and the baby inside was stabbed and murdered as well. So that's where we're getting numbers 5 and 6. This is why I keep saying they killed 6 and not 5 people. The unborn baby inside Doreen, whether she was 6 or 7 months pregnant, that is a life that was taken and should absolutely have been counted. It wasn't. They just counted the 5 and then would say that Doreen was also pregnant. They didn't say 6. In my eyes, that's 6. All right, but let's take a closer look at what happened to Doreen. They, prior to killing her, the maniacs tortured this woman. They had her ingest glass, shards of glass. They had her eat shards of glass, and then they smashed bottles against her face. Or in reverse order, they smashed the bottles against her face, and then from the shattered bottles, had her eat that glass. Okay? Then they stabbed her, they beat her, they stabbed the infant inside her stomach, inside her uterus. Evelyn Allen was the 6th person, official or 5th. I'm saying 6th. Evelyn Allen was 38. She was found dead in her burning apartment, a block from the other lady's home, and she was Ahalt's ex-girlfriend. So they killed Doreen, who was Campbell's ex-girlfriend, and then they killed Ahalt's ex-girlfriend, Evelyn Allen. She'd been beaten to death before her place was set on fire, because they set both of the residents on fire and they set the tavern on fire, maybe thinking they're hiding evidence. Let's to be clear, this is not a mental health issue. These men made a plan and then they executed it together. They must have discussed it. This isn't just something that happens willy-nilly. These kind of intense, brutal slayings, you don't just do that. It's planned. These people planned it. The then police chief, Gordon Erlacher, had said, "There's no question in our minds that at the rate they were committing murders, there would have been additional murders had they not been apprehended. The more these people remained on the streets, the more the lives of the people of Rochester were in danger." And in danger people were. I would think anybody that even knew these people without realizing it may have been targets. They may have had more targets, these two people, Ahalt and Campbell. Detective Leonard Borelli said, who was involved in the case, that he had been in homicide for 11 years and couldn't remember anything like this. This is a man who spent the last 11 years investigating homicides, and he'd never seen anything like this in his tenure in homicide. Rochester, he had said, had 29 or 30 murders in all of last year, which would be 1985. That's according to Borello. Okay. 29 to 30 murders. Here's 6 in just a weekend. 6 in a weekend. 30 for the whole year, 6 in one weekend. The suspects, Robert Ahalt, like I said, he was 41. He was a cook, a chef. Well, I'll say cook, because I'm going to go with cook. And Carl Campbell, was 27 and a mechanic, both of Rochester, and they were arrested at Mr. Ahalt's home Saturday after a concerned citizen called the police. This is what Detective Borelli explains. He said both men had been unemployed for months and had criminal records. Mr. Ahalt for violence and Mr. Campbell for property crimes. That's what was noted. I couldn't find anything on their previous crimes. I couldn't find too much of anything on either of these people, unfortunately, other than the articles documenting, chronicling the events of this weekend in November. Each of them was charged with 5 counts of murder during a robbery, 5 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of third-degree arson, and 1 count of second-degree arson. And they were held at the Monroe County Jail for arraignment. Like I said, we've got that a minimum $1 million bond per. You can't rationalize irrational acts, said the chief investigator, Major William D. Mayer, like we said. And without a doubt, these were irrational. So he says you can't rationalize irrational acts, and without a doubt, these were irrational. It was only the second time in New York legal history that 2 juries had been called on to listen to one case and give 2 verdicts. I find that very interesting because this happened with these two. We had 2 juries listening, and they would render 2 different verdicts at the end of the trial. Kind of fascinating. I actually would love to sit in on something like that. During the trial, the defendants sat at the same table, but the 2 juries sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, one in a specifically built jury box. So they built a special jury box so they could house the 12 jurors for Ahalt and the 12 jurors for Campbell. But it's only the second time in New York legal history at this time that it had ever been done with the 2 juries with 2 different verdicts during one trial. The jury considering Ahalt's case wore blue lapel tags, and Campbell's jury wore yellow tags, which I find kind of interesting because if they sat on different sides of the courtroom, what difference does it make what color the tags are? But it's been pointed out, and I, as a great podcaster, am sharing that with you. So most testimony involved both cases, but when a witness was providing information that involved only one defendant, the other jury was taken out of the room, taken out of the courtroom. The defendants testified in front of their own jury only. So when Campbell took the seat and was sworn in as to give testimony, Ahalt's jury left the courtroom, and when Ahalt gave testimony, Campbell's jury left the room, so they wouldn't be, compromised on their decision to decide on one defendant. They weren't taking both defendants' information to decide for one defendant's innocence or guilt. It makes sense. A little confusing, but it does make sense. Each defendant was charged with 3 counts of arson, 5 of intentional murder, and 5 of murder during the commission of a felony. In this case, robbery. This is when they ransacked the tavern, stealing from the till and smashing up the cigarette machine and stealing cigarettes. That would be the robbery where they killed 3 people during a robbery. So you can understand that. And then 1 murder during a sexual assault. Poor Doreen, this pregnant woman, was assaulted by these men, tortured by these men. I can't even comprehend it. For me, the worst crimes are crimes of violence committed against women and children. That's not sexist. That's not sexist. Oh, maybe it is. You know what? Maybe it is. If it is, I'm not going to apologize for it. For me, those are the worst crimes against women and against children. Campbell was acquitted of a charge of murder during a robbery at the home of one of the women, and both murder counts in the slaying of the woman at the other home. Campbell was. Ahalt was acquitted of murder during a sexual assault. So Ahalt must not have touched Doreen, I'm guessing. Attorneys for both men had objected to the dual juries. They filed a bunch of motions on this, and I found them, and I understood them reading them, but to then explain them, I guess the easiest thing to say is the the attorneys representing Ahalt and Campbell did not want dual juries. They wanted one jury, one court case, one verdict. But that's not what the courts wanted. That's not what the courts decided, and they went ahead with the dual juries. The first dual trial was held in 1984, so just a couple years prior, and it was in Nassau County, and it involved two young men who were drag racing and were charged with criminal negligent homicide when their car slammed into another car, killing that driver. So that was the first time back in 1984. So, like I said, I Googled the hell out of Ahalt and Campbell. I couldn't even find really images. There was one image of one of the men in a newspaper clipping, but there's really not even pictures of these guys on the internet. I couldn't even find anything on Dick's 43 Lounge, which I think would have been fascinating to learn a little bit about more these 75-year-old women who owned it, but there was nothing there for me to find on the internet. So it was kind of discouraging. I mean, I could request all kinds of things from the government, foil this and get documents but I think for the purpose of the podcast, at least for this particular podcast, is just sharing that unbelievable 1986 killing spree that took place in November. It's horrific. It's horrific. Um, the best thing, the best thing that I can do and that I can tell you is that both men are currently serving life sentences in prison for the heinous crimes they did commit in November of 1986. Just heinous. I mean, just violent. Just violent for the sake of violence is what it sounds like. I would love to understand their rationale. I was hoping somebody had written a book on them. I could not find a book written on these two. Maybe that's something I can do at this age, their age. Well, I guess my age as well. Maybe trying to head up to whatever prisons they're at and doing some interviews might be a good true crime book. Might be a good true crime book. Look at that. I just got myself an idea on this podcast. Hey, nobody take that idea. That's my idea. Anyway, once again, I do apologize for missing last Monday. It's the first Monday I've missed since February when this podcast kicked off, and I do not intend to miss any more. So you guys have a great Monday. Do me a huge favor, though. Tell your friends about What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. Share a link wherever you listen. If you're listening on Spotify or iHeartRadio or wherever, share a link with friends. Say, hey, this guy's not so bad. He's a pretty interesting true crime podcaster, and you should be listening to the episodes that he puts out. That's what I hope you'll do. That's what I want you to do. And if I had any influence, that's what I would have you do. Thank you for listening to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. As always, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. New episodes every Monday.